Now, small to mid-sized retailers selling items deemed non-essential say that they face the financial brunt of the lockdown and lament the loss of sales and staff. And they also say that they do not receive any lockdown provision, and if they continue not to receive anything, they face possible closure due to cash flow problems and the need to pay rent, as landlords claim not to understand what exactly their problem is. Now, over 50 of these retailers have organised themselves under the mid-sized independent retailers group, MIR, and they account for about 2,300 stores and some 21,000 employees. And representing about 20 of these retailers and their concerns is Jonathan Kingsley-Hall, who is the Managing Director of JKH, which is a business and property consulting firm. Jonathan, welcome to Morning Live. Thanks so much for speaking to us.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you for your time.
First off, can you just give us a description of the type of retailers that you represent?
These are all of your favorite family brands that have been around for years, from the Cape Union Marts of this world to the Jam Clothings, the Fashion Worlds, the BT Games, and typically mid-sized family businesses that have been built up over decades or even generations in some cases.
So President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, announced the establishment of the Solidarity Fund for businesses who may be in trouble. But you say the mid-sized retailers do not qualify. Explain to us what's happening there.
Well, in terms of the DTI and C's classification, firstly, SMMEs are classified as businesses with a turnover of less than 80 million a year. And then in terms of further relief that came out later, the government was offering relief to businesses with a turnover of up to 300 million. And the reality is that the vast bulk of our customers, or our clients, should I say, are businesses with over 300 million a year. So we're kind of the missing middle. And there is no relief out there for these guys. And realistically, they are facing closure within weeks or months.
So currently, what is the situation? Are some of these members already laying off workers? And do you have any handle on the numbers that we're talking about at the moment?
It's growing at the moment. Everybody's obviously trying to hang on to their employees. We all have a responsibility. This is a national and it's a social issue. But at the moment, we've got in our grouping, which is a small group, but we've got over 23,000 employees. So if I were to put that in perspective, that's one and a third times bigger than Edcon, for example, has, just to put it in perspective. Yes, the guys are laying off small numbers at the moment, but we are seeing it growing, and we are concerned. We're doing our best.
So if we don't see a change in the regulations soon, what are the prospects as we sit right now, as per your members? What are they telling you is likely to happen?
It's inevitable that they all last no more than a few months. The reality out there from a retail point of view is that the sales aren't being done. We've suffered weeks of lockdown. We've come back now in an environment where we can't sell our full range of goods. Sales are depressed drastically in the mid-sized businesses in our typical shopping centres, for example. The guys are trading at about 50% of what they were doing this time last year. The effect of that is that instead of making great profits, they're suffering huge losses. And unlike the listed retailers, from our supermarkets to our mass marts and our listed fashion retailers, these guys simply don't have the cash reserves to keep them going. What's interesting is what we're seeing in the lower end of the market, the brands selling into the township markets, for example, is that at the moment in May, they're trading fantastically well. And this is because there's no outflow of spend out of the townships into the CBDs, because people are locked in the townships. So that category at the moment is doing okay. However, the reality is that category of consumer, or that level of income, is going to be our hardest hit in the months going forward, So while that group of retailers is having a good time in the month of May, we expect that to reverse very quickly. And then as we move into the more conservative, mid-priced brands, people aren't going to the shopping centres the way they used to. We don't have parents taking their kids to and from school. And as importantly, or possibly more importantly, we don't have people going to and from work every day. So the likes of a Sandton City, for example, which trades to an extent off the workers who are in immediate surroundings during the day, are suffering terribly. And there is no relief for these guys, these mid-sized independent retailers. It's like they're the missing middle.
So what exactly are your members asking for at the moment? Because I see one of the concerns you are raising is with landlords who you say do not understand the plight of your members. So what exactly would you like to see happen?
I think it's a case of talking. This is a fight. Unfortunately, the reality is the landlords are in as difficult a position as the retailers. At the moment, I think there's a knee-jerk reaction, and the landlords are pushing back and saying, well, we won't talk to you, we'll take on each tenant individually. And there's certain logic in that. But the reality is if we're not standing together, and if we don't appreciate that this is not a one-month scenario, but this is going to go on for months, if not a year or so, there is no future. Because if the retailers can't pay the landlords can't pay the banks, and we all collapse. And at the moment, I almost feel like we're on the edge of an apocalypse. And it sounds a little dramatic, but if you look at these mid-sized independent retailers, they probably account for 20% of the total space in our shopping centres. These numbers are approximate, and I can't give you an exact number. The listed nationals, probably around 38-40% of the total space. And then at the bottom of the pecking order, obviously the independents and the franchisees. And the reality is they don't have money, and I don't know how many of them will actually even reopen when they're able to. So there's a lot of pressure being put on this mid-sized independent group. And it's difficult because we're not getting government relief. And so we're really reaching out there to the landlords and saying, guys, we need to talk. We need to work together. And we can't just be talking about April during lockdown, and we can't just be talking about May when certain stores are open selling limited ranges. We really need to be looking at the midterm to ensure the survival of these businesses. Because a simple example is if you take any of the fashion or footwear retailers, for example, how do they go and order their summer and Christmas stock right now, knowing that in their current situation, they won't be able to pay their suppliers when the goods arrive in 4, 5, or 6 months' time. And for that reason, amongst others, we need to be taking a midterm view and an approach to enable people to plan and budget as best they can in this very uncertain environment.
Well, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Jonathan Kingsley-Hall, representing some small and mid-sized retailers under the mid-sized independent retailers group. And you heard there the strife that they are currently going through. And of course, we still have the uncertainty. We haven't peaked yet. We don't know how long this situation will continue for. And of course, as Jonathan was saying there, they are hoping that the landlords, understanding that the landlords have their own pressures, but hoping that they would come up with some form of reprieve, because once again, and perhaps Leanne, if you can come in here, the relief measures that are in place just not sufficient. It's not taking care of everybody, and too many people slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, very much so. And the struggle for people to try and get any response, and we know this is something that we've been trying to follow up on and assist people with. But, you know, landlords, rentals, all of these things. I mean, you know, I know of people that actually, you know, they own restaurants within a casino complex, and that complex is still demanding that they pay rent. Now, I mean, can you imagine? You know that any form of casino or rental or any entertainment area like that are probably the last to open, and yet the areas that are operating in there have not been operating for all these months, and they're still demanding rent. It's crazy.
It is, and it raises more questions than answers, of course, Leanne, because as Jonathan rightly points out, and this applies even to the home rental market, where tenants are complaining and they're saying, we're sitting at home, we actually cannot afford to pay rent. The landlords, however, are saying, but the bank is not really giving me any reprieve at this stage, so I can't let you off the hook. You need to pay me so that I can pay the bank.
Yeah.
And it's just a crazy chain of events, that multiplier effect certainly in full force.
Yeah, you know, and as we move into a break, because I know we've got to take one, but the one thing that banks can, they need to assist more. And I still think that cry needs to be even louder. Even with the interest rate reduction, Sakina, I mean, we could see the banks actually deciding and taking upon themselves to lower the interest rate that they offer, because the interest rates at banks are very, very high, and they can go over and above what the Reserve Bank has stipulated. So, you know, that's something to take into consideration as well. Banks need to do more.
And I think this is something that we spoke about right at the beginning of this lockdown as well. I personally didn't think it was enough to appeal to certain sectors and say, can you please? We needed to be more forceful, Leanne. And government needed to say, listen, this is the situation. We all got to pull in the same direction. And unfortunately, if people are sitting at home and they're not earning an income, we needed to be more drastic in terms of enforcing certain measures and saying, there will be no payments because people simply cannot pay you because they are at home. And unfortunately, that didn't happen, and this is where we find ourselves now.
All right, well, it's tough. I don't know if we're still taking that break. Are we, Director?